Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. I'm Avi Grossman. This is Parsha Talk. Today, we have a special guest, Dr. Marc Shapiro, who is a professor of Jewish history, if I'm not mistaken, at Stanford University, right?
No, Stanford, that would be Molly.
No. What's the Scranton?
Scranton, yeah.
Scranton, not Stanford. Scranton, which is all the way in Pennsylvania. I've been there a few times, driving through, and also the author of many wonderful books that yeshiva guys who have a little bit too much time on their hands like to learn, like to study. Always a good read. And many articles in print and on the usual websites, especially the Sfarim blog, which is always a must read. Personally, I was exposed to Dr. Shapiro's writings early on. It must have been about 14 years ago, or no, more than that, 16 years ago, when I was introduced to the limits of Jewish theology by a fellow in the Beis Medrash. At the time, he was in Rabbi Parnas's Gemara Shir, and Rabbi Parnas was the pillar of our Beis Medrash back then. And it was interesting that he was sort of the impetus for the creation of that book. And then, of course, there's some other great books, the Between the Yeshiva World and Modern Orthodoxy, about the radiation, his life, and Sol Lieberman and the Orthodox. And I forget the exact title of the censorship book that came out. Must have been 3 years ago, perhaps?
No, it's already 2015. Changing the Immutable.
Changing the Immutable, okay. So that was a great book also. And, of course, I got that from none other than Rebbetzin Attar, who's on here, Rabbi Eltman's daughter-in-law, was able to provide me with her copy. And most recently in Hebrew, Egrot Malchei Rabbanan, which the professor actually has produced himself. It's his own correspondences with great rabbis of the 20th century and the 21st century. And I haven't gotten a physical copy. I've seen quite a few pages online from someone who was nice enough to share the PDFs and pictures with me, but I have to get a physical copy. And now we're going to get right into it. Dr. Shapiro is going to, I guess we'll ask him, this past week, the American election still hasn't come to a timely resolution. Big surprise. I'm sorry for those of you who are on Avelis. I'm very sorry. For those of you who are celebrating, may you have many other celebrations. But for us, what's important is the passing of two Torah luminaries. Rabbi David Feinstein passed away right before Shabbos in New York. He's Rav Moshe Feinstein's elder son, and the Rosh Hashiva of MTJ back in Manhattan, on the Lower East Side, and the Chief Rabbi, the former Chief Rabbi of the British Empire. Is that how they officially title him?
No, there's no more British Empire. If anything, it would be the Commonwealth. But okay, he's actually the United Hebrew Congregations.
United Hebrew Congregations, and a very important spokesman for Jewry the world over, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. And I guess it's unfortunate for us, and we're still in the middle of the Shiva for these two rabbis. This is probably the foremost rabbi in New York City and the foremost rabbi in England. So, Dr. Shapiro, what can we say about first Rabbi Feinstein and his legacy and the significance of his life and teachings?
Okay, well, first I'd say, the word foremost is obviously people will disagree. If you're a Satmar Chassid, he's not the foremost. And
okay, well,
I don't think we need to use the term like foremost. And he himself was a very modest. I never met him, although I know members of his family. He was a very modest person and humble and really shunned the limelight in many ways. But he didn't really publish, but he's a posek muvhak. And really a great posek, especially after his father passed away. He came into his own, and a really down-to-earth person. I'm friends with people who were really great students of his, and it is a great loss. He was really the mainstay of Torah Judaism on the Lower East Side for so many years, and it's a great loss. And what's interesting, I told one of his grandchildren this, that unlike so many others, he never was brought into the Orthodox world always has disputes. And you never saw him being brought into these disputes and everything. He was able to rise above it, or whatever the reason is, that he was someone who was special, that really was above it all. And it's a great loss.
Have you seen that Rav Feinstein, was he affiliated with the Aguda in any meaningful way, or with the RCA?
He was not with the RCA. With the Aguda, he was on... on the Moetzes even, but I mean, it's not like he wasn't out there making statements and things like that. The thing about the Moetzes is some people are there because of political reasons, and others are there because they're great Torah scholars. No one had any doubt why he was there, and I hope that even though he didn't really publish, that he had written, and they'll be releasing it because he has many psukim about different matters. And you can go online, you can see interesting videos. You can see him going to see the Parah Aduma that was born near Lakewood. You can, the Halachic Organ Donor Society, you can watch the way he's a no-nonsense person, the way he describes his father's position on the time of death. And, there's a lot we'll learn about him in the future. I think the Hespedim, if you listen to the Hespedim, both his grandson and his son gave you an insight into who he was as a personality. I'll just say one thing that his son mentioned. He was quite ill. In fact, they thought he was going to die months ago. He recovered, and they were fortunate to have a number of months with him, but he couldn't fast on Yom Kippur. And his son said he wasn't upset with that. Many people would be upset. He goes, this is the Ratzon Hashem. This is the halacha. I'm too weak. I can't fast. So this is what the halacha wants me to do. I mean, in that way, like a real ish halacha. If this is what the Torah wants me to do, then why am I upset? I'm supposed to eat. And that's and the son spoke about minhag, how people would come to him and bring a sefer and say things like, well, how can we do this? The halacha, he says, we have a minhag, we have a masorah. Don't start bringing me what Sfarim tell us. We go by our masorah. And that the fact that we do this means that we do not accept this opinion. So very strong on masorah and minhag. And so I encourage anyone, the good thing is that sometimes, I have to say, I hope this isn't offensive, but when you have funerals of great rabbis, other great rabbis speak, and you sit there and you think it's like you're listening to drushes. And you go away from it and you don't have any sense of who the person was. At Rav Dovid's funeral, his son and his grandson, you really got a sense of who he was as a family man, as a person, the great chesed he did for people. I mean, he was running all over the place, raising money and meeting with people. So I was very appreciative that we were let into the private life of his family to really understand a bit who he was, for those of us who didn't live on the Lower East Side.
I feel sort of sad whenever someone passes away. I feel like, oh man, missed opportunity to somehow have a connection. I don't know what the student body MTJ is like now. Is it what it used to be, or is it?
Well, I'm assuming it's smaller. Look, it never was one of the major yeshivas when you think of, let's say, Mir and in America tells things like that in the past. It was always a smaller yeshiva. I mean, it had a decent student body. Today, the Lower East Side, the population is not that much, so it's much smaller. But it's a mainstay. Although the book that just came out, Jonathan Boyarin just wrote a book on and he calls it the New York's oldest yeshiva, which isn't true. Yeshiva Tzalchana is older. Yeah. But the other day I said I think Torah Vodaas is older, but if you count the fact that MTJ was originally a Talmud Torah, then it became the yeshiva, it's actually older. So I think it's the second oldest continuous yeshiva. And Rav Moshe, when he came in, they made a base medrash and a program for older guys. And then, then it really took off, but it existed before Rav Moshe. Around, yeah.
Well, that's a good question. When does any organism become a new organism? Life just continues. Someone might even argue that perhaps the Staten Island Yeshiva is a continuation of MTJ. Also,
Lakewood is Kletsk. Yeah. Lakewood is Kletsk. It's now in America.
And Gush, they say continuation somehow of Volozhin. I've heard them try to say that. I don't know, but apparently they consider themselves the Zionist briskers. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, unfortunately passed away. He was only I think 72 years old, and I saw when he retired, if that's the right word, when he stepped down, or when his term as Chief Rabbi came to an end, the Prince of Wales joked in his farewell speech that both he and the Chief Rabbi had now reached. They were born in the year of Israel's creation of 48. And at the age of 65, they had both reached retirement age, and that the position of Chief Rabbi, like being the position of Prince of Wales, is more of a predicament than a privilege. What do you make of that assessment? The role of Chief Rabbi and Rav Sachs in particular.
Okay, well, obviously, Rav Sachs did not need the Chief Rabbinate. In fact, he moved way beyond that. So much so that when I would go once or twice a year to speak, that the one thing that there were complaints about is the people in England. That is because the analogy I gave is that if you're, let's say, a pulpit rabbi and you publish a
Yeah.
bestseller, and next thing you know, you're on all the talk shows and traveling all over, the local people feel what's going on. Rabbi Sachs very quickly grew out of that. Well, I mean, the position itself
Yeah.
is a much more august title than it is, because when you think how many Jews are there in England, 200,000, I think they're saying now, 250, something like that. Of them, how many are Orthodox? And then when you say how many are Haredi and just remove them, you're talking actually about a very small number who are represented by the so-called chief rabbinate, because we do say the Commonwealth, but people in Australia have their own thing, Canada, they don't need. So it's actually a very small number of people who are actually so-called represented. If you're in Leeds, for instance, or Manchester, or even in non-Orthodox shul, you're not represented officially by the chief rabbi, but it became symbolically the official Jewish position, like the Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, when his predecessor was also a public intellectual, when Rabbi Sachs becomes chief rabbi, he very quickly begins speaking on issues of the day, and he even moves out of the parochial. He becomes the most popular clergyman in England, speaking on the BBC. People thought he was more popular than the Archbishop of Canterbury, and he becomes an international figure with his many books. And he really outgrew this position of chief rabbinate of England, and really because he was a spokesman of Judaism to the entire world, and not just to Jews. And one of his major points was that we make a mistake in thinking the Torah is just for Jews. Torah is for everyone, non-Jews, the world at large. And he really believed in bringing Torah message. So as I said, he really outgrew that position. And although it was a stepping stone, you couldn't have predicted this when he became chief rabbi, and it enabled him to get some initial exposure. But he really, as I said, went way beyond that as an international figure. I can tell you that one conversation I had with them, he gave me, I guess you call it Musar. I didn't take offense at all, but it showed you who he was and what he wanted. He said to me that, because he would read my stuff, he even reviewed my first book, he even read this foreign blog, but he said to me, it's time for me to stop being so parochial. He said, I want you to write for the Wall Street Journal, write for commentary, that sort of thing, to get out there. In other words, he was telling me that I should be him, that have an impact on the world. I'm honored that he thought that I could. I don't know if that's my thing, if I could, even if I wanted to, but at the end of the day, for better or worse, I'm more interested in, as I said the other night in my class, and writing about an obscure 18th century Hebrew book that only interests a few people. But that was what he believed, and he told this to other people as well. If he thought that they could write, he thought that we have a message that we can bring to the world at large. And we're very fortunate that he did that. And there are people. Mayor Soloveitchik, for instance, in America is known as a public intellectual. You have a number of other young, talented Orthodox people. The fact that the leading Jewish public intellectual in the world was an Orthodox Jew, in fact, an Orthodox rabbi, I think is an amazing thing, and a great Kiddush Hashem that he was able to bring Jewish values. So we need people like that. And although it's not my interest to do that, I don't even know if I could, but I just never had an interest. I understand why he thought that that was important, and it's a great loss. You're going to have books written about his ideas and his thought, and there's a lot to say about him.
See that. I hope that someone picks up the mantle soon. It's difficult when someone leaves a gap like this. There is, of course, the UK still has its chief rabbi. Rabbi Mervis, thank God, is around. But I don't think that he has the same personality or the same interests as Rabbi Sachs eventually grew into. He still is basically the chief rabbi in England.
Not only doesn't he have it, that's from what I'm told, that's why they picked him, because he focuses on the local communities. He's not interested, and that's not his thing anyway. They didn't think that was Rabbi Sachs's thing when they hired him, but it immediately became apparent, I shouldn't say immediately, after a few years it became apparent that he was looking really as the world as a stage. So that's always an issue. Right now the chief rabbi can focus on the English Jewish community, but the Sachs had a way with the English language, and I don't know how he did it. I don't know how not only did he read so much, how he published so much. His latest book on morality, which just came out, I just ordered it, and how is he keeping up with all the stuff in the world, the scholarship and the political opinions? It is incredible. I don't know what else to say other than that. Let me just say one more thing. It was such a shock because they announced that he had cancer, and people say Tehillim about 3 weeks ago. But I figured that this was like at the beginning stages. We know all sorts of people who have that. They have chemo many times, especially with today's technology. Things go okay, and then just a few weeks later to hear this news. So I contacted a rabbi in England who's a friend of mine, and because I thought maybe they knew that he was really much sicker than was let on. And he said that no, this was a great surprise for them as well, unless this is a fluke that it happened so quickly after they discovered it. But usually with a case like this, you assume it's been going on for a while. And so it was a shock, not just for us, but also and this is actually not United Synagogue, but in one of the synagogues very close to United Synagogue in England. And they had no idea about, it was a shock to them like it was to us. Great loss.
I also appreciated very much Rabbi Sachs's ability to stay apolitical. I mentioned the Prince of Wales, like the royal family there in England. Rabbi Sachs had this way of representing everybody without getting involved in politics. Unfortunately, today sometimes you do have rabbinic figures who are outspoken and perhaps even champions of morality and the Jewish ethic, but all too often they do get involved in politics, or even just a tint of that. You mentioned Rabbi Soloveitchik, Rabbi Meir Soloveitchik, our Rabbi Soloveitchik's older son. Even he was involved a little bit in Republican politics. Not that I have a problem with that.
First thing I say about the chief rabbis of England have always been apolitical. The position requires you to be apolitical. The exception was when Rabbi Mervis felt that because Jeremy Corbyn was so extreme and anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, that he had to write that public letter. But that's quite unique. Now, Jacobowitz was very close to Thatcher. In office, he was pretty apolitical, but he also, especially when he finished with chief rabbinate, he did come down on conservative positions, even in the office. I can't recall now how many years he lived after he left office. I'll check on that later.
Quite a while.
You said that Mayor Soloveitchik, a little political. He's very political, not just a little political.
Sorry.
And that's, yes, he spoke before the Republican National Convention. I shouldn't say spoke. He gave the benediction, and Haskell Hookstein was supposed to give the benediction last time with Trump until he was pressured to move out. So simply giving the benediction does not make you political, although if you listen to his benediction, Mayor Soloveitchik, it was a political benediction, which I believe was not appropriate. But quite apart from that, he's a public intellectual. He writes for commentary first things. He expresses his views very clearly. And the synagogue, even though the members of the synagogue, this is the Upper West Side, most of them are probably much more liberal than him. He's a dynamic speaker and a real sharp intellectual, sharp mind, great intellectual. They're happy that he does what he does, even if they don't agree with his views. And I don't know if he preaches from the pulpit, but as a private citizen, he's entitled to, he's what we call, he's not a neocon, he's a theocon. He's a conservative based on really theological reasons to a certain extent. I've had him speak at my university twice when I could afford him. Now it'll be hard for me. He's really very popular now, but I got him when he was an up and coming person, and I think he's really great. But he's political, no question about it.
So maybe one day, I guess it would take someone with a more British pedigree to have that ability to stay politically neutral. I even find it myself. I can't have friends, and thank God I have to hang out with Israelis mostly. I can't have English-speaking friends anymore without having to take sides in things that people seem to take very personally.
Yeah, every pulpit rabbi, basically, I think, in the modern Orthodox world, I don't know about the Haredi world, has to be apolitical because your job is to rise above it. And it's very different in Israel. In Israel, you have rabbis signing letters to vote for political parties. You don't have that in America among the modern Orthodox. And among the Haredim, until this last election, you basically never had it either. The last election was quite unusual in that respect because the rabbi is supposed to represent everyone. In the great yeshivas, in the Mir Yeshiva, for instance, they did not take a side on Mizrahi and Aguda. And the reason they explained, not just in the Mir Yeshiva, other yeshivas, is because that, and therefore they weren't in the Moetzis or things like that, because we need to be able to appeal to everyone. And that's the classic approach of rabbis, to stay above the politics. Of course, there are exceptions. If you're dealing with real anti-Semitism, or sometimes rabbis feel they need to take a different perspective. Rav Yehuda Cook, however, he said that the politics of the Jews is Torah, and therefore it's the job of the rabbi to speak politics. But we would, in America at least, I could say
Right.
they wouldn't stand for that. And even if the rabbi is preaching in accord with my politics, it's not really appropriate because he's going to turn off people who don't share the view. And so that's how I would put it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've also been very wary of endorsing any particular politician because it seems that most politicians are not exactly role models. The hold on one second. We mentioned Rabbi Sachs. We hope that his memory should be for a blessing, and hopefully also that we find someone to replace. Not like Chas v'sholom replace him because we need him, but more like to step in. The sun sets and the sun rises when, by the time Rabbi Akiva had passed away, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, I think it is, was already born. So we're just waiting to see who's next in line now.
But you sometimes can wait a long time. If you think back before the Sachs era, there was no figure in the Orthodox world who had this sort of reach and was a moral guide across continents. Someone who could deal with matters of broad humanistic concern. Now, he's quite unique in that respect. Someone like a Rav Soloveitcher or Lichtenstein, but they were parochial. They spoke to the Orthodox world. Someone who really spoke to the world at large. He's quite unique, and I don't think someone like that could be replaced very soon.
So yeah, it's unfortunate. It's like in the time of the Shoftim, there weren't set prophets back then. You look at the Book of Kings, or you see that there's always a Navi around. And they seem to describe, they even call it, that's the period of the Nevi'im. Whereas before Shmuel Navi showed up, most of the Nevi'im are anonymous in the book, and it seems that there went decades, maybe centuries, in between these Nevi'im, which basically means a spokesman. And yeah, I could see that happening. I hope it doesn't.
We're assuming that this is the role of Rabbi Sachs was a positive one. In more right-wing communities, they would disagree. They would think that this is not something. We should not be interested in spreading the Jewish Torah values to the world. We should focus on our own concerns. So inward-looking versus outward-looking. So you also have hashkafic differences. More of a German Orthodox Hirschian type approach versus more of a traditionalist approach. So you're not going from the Haredi world, you're never going to have a figure who's going to be like that. It's going to have to come out of the modern Orthodox world. But where are you going to get someone with such broad learning and insights? And it's not easy at all.
Yeah. Okay. So we can only hope. Of course, you also know that our greatest prophets were also prophets to the Gentiles. The whole book of Yonah is his own mission to people entirely abroad. And large sections of the three other major prophetic books, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, have prophecies specifically addressed to other national groups that were not us. So yeah, I'm hoping that.
And I mean, it's throughout the prophetic books, and the whole idea of the chosen people, chosen for what? Chosen for service. We're each one of us. We're Mamlechas Kohanim. How could we be? What does that mean? We're all priests. But the priests are sort of like it's like they're like the go-between. So every one of us is a go-between to the rest of the world for Torah values and everything. Each one of us is a priest in that respect vis-a-vis the world. But throughout the long years of the exile, many times this was forgotten, especially since it wouldn't have been accepted so easily from the outside world. But now there's an opportunity, and that really returns us to the prophetic sentiments and the prophetic mission that you see the prophets. They were not just speaking to the Jews. So in that respect, Rabbi Sachs was sort of following that model, which already Rosh Hashanah Hirsch speaks about. Of course, he was in Germany when things were opening up, and there was a possibility for that. So I would hope, as I said, Meir Soloveitcher follows in that model. We have some young Orthodox scholars as Michael Helfand, I think he's at Pepperdine, and others who write for general journals and magazines, and it's important we need the Gedolei Torah and the poskim who focus just on Shas and poskim, but then we need others who are able to present other approaches, and we'll have to focus on other areas, and they all are necessary.
Now, one of the things that allowed Rabbi Sachs to really get out there is the advent of the internet, as you know. Do you think Rav Cook, who passed away almost a century ago, do you think he was fit into this model, that Rav Cook was a representative of world Jewry? Of course, Rav Cook had spent a significant amount of time in England also, and that's where he learned English. Do you think Rav Cook was a representative like this back in his day?
No, because although Rav Cook did have secular education and tried to keep up to a certain degree, he didn't write in any other languages. He was only writing Hebrew, so he was writing to the Jewish community. He didn't have really. I shouldn't say he didn't have the opportunity. You did. I mean, someone like Rav Herzog
Yeah.
was able, for instance, to speak in languages and publish in Irish Times and things like that. Rav Cook did not ever move in that direction at all, and he never encouraged his students to do that as well. He encouraged them to learn the wisdoms of the world, because in the new state that was coming, this new Jewish era, this new era we're entering, and Jews need to be complete people. But he was focused on enlarging Judaism and the Jewish people's grasp. He didn't really focus on the non-Jews as that we should be reaching out to them in a way that Sachs did.
Okay. But okay. I think that I mentioned the internet. In your opinion, how has the advent of the internet affected, let's say, the way the Jews study Torah in our times? And do you think that's been a positive trend, whatever it may be?
Well, I mean, as with all these things, there's positive and negative. Just like when printing, if I would ask someone, was printing a positive phenomenon, everyone would say, obviously it is, because now we can have all Sfarim. But at the time, there were people who were not so happy with printing. The Ashar of Kandia, Yosef Shalom Domedigo, mentions how it used to be, when it was manuscript, only if it was from an accepted Torah authority, people would copy it. But now anyone, even if you have nonsense, you can print a book. So there's no way of controlling distribution. And that can be multiplied many times over when it comes to the internet, because it's not even a question about a book anymore. Anyone could just put stuff out there, and it could be confusing. But I think you have to say that on the whole, it's been an incredible success. People, no matter where you are, there's shiurim online and things you can read. From all different approaches. You can listen to Daf Yomi, numerous Magidi Shurim. It's been a huge game changer, but it's also had subversive elements to it. So, for instance, I mentioned the problem of incorrect ideas or dangerous ideas that are put out there. But there's also another element in that the role of a posek, let's just give you one example. People today, if they have a question, they don't know if you can open a can on Shabbos or something. The first thing you can do is you can go online and you can pull up a couple articles and you can see Rosh Zalman says this, Rav Yosef says this, and people on their own can determine. And maybe that's okay, because it's like reading a sefer, but it's sort of, you get to the point then, what do you need the local posek for? Why do I need the local posek? Granted, if it's some unusual new question, I need to ask the posek. But if it's just a general question, I and everyone else can simply go online and I can see what the great poskim say. And in that sense, it's been a little subversive to the traditional way of how halacha and how communities were usually led. But all in all, it's been an enormous change, and everyone has to join. No one can avoid it anymore. Even the Aguda has a website now, because everyone recognizes that this is the new us. Just like originally people opposed newspapers and radio and printing, this is where we are.
Okay, so I guess we just have to go with it and work with it and hope that somehow the natural mechanisms that work to check and to weed out the falsehood, or to weed out those who are actually not qualified, is just like people know who to ask the questions to in person, and classically they'll know which I guess websites or which media available are the bar samcha, the ones they could trust.
Yeah, I mean, it was the same issue with books. I mean, the same. That's going to be it. And it's been, if you just go, for instance, to Wagyu Torah, which has thousands and thousands of shiurim. You could spend your whole life, 24 hours a day, and not even make a dent in it. All this has to be seen as, and also the easy access of Sfarim. Otzar Chachma, HebrewBooks.org, Sfarim that people haven't seen in generations, because there's few copies. They just have access to all the different Sfarim. On the one hand, I love libraries, and this is, we're passing the era of the library is coming to an end, it seems. But on the other hand, the ease of access and the ability to read Torah literature from all over, it's something people could have only dreamed about years ago.
Do you think the level of scholarship has improved, or do you think that it's been maybe watered down, the scholarly articles that have been put out there?
It's interesting for someone who I've seen many articles where it's very obvious they're just lifted right. The Bekios is right from Otzar Chachma, and you could see it sometimes because they're citing pages and things, and if there's a typos or a page number is wrong in Otzar Chachma, they'll have it there, and sometimes they'll be citing from a book, and they won't realize that who really wrote it because there's a mistaken title page. I've seen a few interesting examples like this. That's definitely an issue, and today Bikiyot is not as valued as it was. On the other hand, there still isn't the ability to use these sources. That's something people still need. I haven't seen an increase in scholarship per se. What I've seen an increase because of the easy access is the ability to cite many sources that no one would have heard about, no one would have thought about. People were able to just go to Otzar Chachma and find something, and I guess that's positive. But it's not scholarship in the sense of giving us new insights. It's just a different level of bikiyut.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that there is one source, though, perhaps one journal? No, you shouldn't pick one journal, but do you think that the rabbinic journals are actually still putting out worthwhile chidushim, new insights in the Torah world?
Well, most of these Torah journals were really never putting out much in the way of insight. The typical articles, take halachic matters, is that it would just be an article. You cite go back to the Gemara, then you cite the Rishonim, a few Achronim, and these are just summary articles. Even in the Journal of Halach and Contemporary Society, few and far between would you have articles that actually took an approach, had insight, made an argument. But that's okay because most people are not going to rise to the level of that, and often these articles are still helpful in organizing the sources. In terms of chidushim, it gives people a chance to test out their ideas, but very few people are reading. If someone publishes chidushim on Masachas Satzei Bava Kama, very few people actually read this in the journals. They read the halachic articles more. But you have to distinguish because all these good halachic journals also have regular rabbis, and then they have the great poskim. Sometimes great poskim publish their articles in the Torah journals before they publish them in their Sfarim, and Rav Asher Weiss and others, and these sometimes can be groundbreaking.
Mm-hmm. What was the last groundbreaking article you read?
Probably because I don't keep up as much on the Torah journals as I come out. I get Otzar Chachma, so usually they're a year or two delayed. But I think the explanations from Rabbi Rabinovich and also of his students explaining the new era of electricity, why you can use key cards on Shabbos and why that sort of thing, which then had a response. But I mean, here is an attempt to deal with the new phenomenon, Shabbos in the electronic age, and present an argument with originality, and is groundbreaking. It might not be accepted, but it's groundbreaking in that it's a new paradigm of what Shabbos is and how to deal with it. And that would be, and that was in Asif, I think it was, and also in the Hamayan. That's an example of what I mean when you get something brand new, not just a review of the earlier literature, but actually making an argument that, if accepted, would seriously change people's life and how they function in hotels, etc.
One of the things also Rabbi Bonovic was talking about the electronics. I think his opinion regarding cell phones and other similar devices on Shabbos is also very important. I remember trying to convince people of similar ideas back when I was a member of the Chevrat Sol in New York. And I was surprised that how it fell on deaf ears, but how open people were to these ideas once I made Aliyah. I think.
Well, when you say what position on a cell phone?
He's a little bit more liberal. I have to see it exactly, but I know also from Edus, from others, that he certainly believed it wasn't as for carrying one around, for example, just to have one, just like the EMT and the paramedic carry their Hatzalah radio. With no problem, just in case. So too, he would have his cell phone because he would take shilas for people he knew would be calling him on Shabbos if they thought, or on Yom Kippur. I think there was a classic story. He was giving his drasha the night of Yom Kippur and paused for a second to take a phone call. And by that, he showed us quite a few, tarti mashma, or, shamina mina, 3 things that you could see, or tlata even, that, he would carry around his cell phone and that he could answer it even if he didn't know who was calling on the other line, and that you have to answer these questions. There's a lot there. Also, I think in the Tchumen, I don't have Tchumen with me, but every now and then I would see something along in those journals also especially after he passed away. There was a whole list of them, amazing things that Rabbi Bonovic said, and I think that it was worth having many of these publications, or just the Yad Pshuta, just so that we could see Rabbi Bonovic's commentary on how the halacha has not stagnated, how it's actually relevant and new insights every day into these things. We're in agreement on that. Thank God for Rabbi Bonovic, and thank God for the Yad Pshuta, which of course is always sitting behind me on the bookshelf. I wish we had more copies.
Yad Pshuta was the first and really is the only commentary, even though the Mishnah Torah was around for 1,000 years, almost, in which actually attempts to go through all the Rishonim and the Gaonim to find the basis and explanation, not Chidushim, just Pshat on every halacha, and it's an incredible achievement, the Yad Pshuta.
But it leads to chidushim. Ironically, it's not an attempt to be mechadish, but it's a basis for seeing how if this is what went into the psak, so we can know how to apply.
It's based on the historical understanding. We know the Rambam had a tradition through the Gaonim, through Spain, and he'll cite, obviously it's relevant if there's a tshuva of the Rambam, if more nevuchim, if Parashat Mishnah. Sometimes you can't understand the Mishnah without seeing what he says in Parashat Mishnah. And it's incredible to think that all these years people writing commentaries in the Mishnah, they don't cite the Parashat Mishnah. They don't cite these other works. The Mor Nevuchim, there are 10 times in the Mor Nevuchim that clarifies what he's saying in the Mishnah Torah. So even Rabbi Kafech doesn't always cite all these sources in his commentary, especially in the later volumes where it became much more of a likut than independent commentary. Why?
Yeah, he got.
As he was getting older, in the later volumes, it's just a collection. There's no really. In Mada and Ava are still original works, very valuable, and even Zmanim. But as you get further and towards the end, it's almost exclusively, there's every now and then he throws in his own original ideas, but it's much more of just a collection. I was told as he was getting older, he wanted to finish it, and he was zocha to finish it in his lifetime, and therefore he settled on doing it quickly with less insights but the first 2 volumes are really wonderful.
Yeah. Thank God. That was another thing. I have to go to another base medrash just to get Rav Kapach's parish. It's not here. It's only available down the hill at 2 other places. But yeah, and even one place they lost their volume 2 of Zmanim, so everything that's beyond like Shabbos and Eruvin seems to be missing until you get to like Hanukkah and Purim and Hanukkah and Tainus. Yeah, so we have to fix that. Recently, also, what we mentioned, I think before we went on. Oh wait, no, we said this at the beginning. You put out the changing the immutable about censorship in the Jewish world of publication. How far back does the tradition of self-censorship go in our Jewish tradition? Could I worry that perhaps the Tosefta, the Mishnah, even Gemara were censored by well-meaning rabbinical figures, Amoraim, for example, Stamayim?
Well, we have those not just in the academic world, even in the Torah world, who said, indeed, there's passages where, let's say, halacha is cited by a woman's name in a Tosefta, and in the Bavli, it's cited in a man's name. So, or there's other passages that appear differently. So it could be, there's no question, there's this concept of halacha ve'morin kain, that it could be halacha, but you don't want to spread it around. So there have been people who, in both the academic world and in the Torah world, who've made the claim that because of what the halacha is. Well, let me just give you another example to show you what I'm talking about. The Netziv says that it's the practice of the Gemara to contort the Mishnah to agree with the final psak.
Okay. Yeah.
What he's saying is that when they're explaining the Mishnah, they're not necessarily explaining what the Mishnah really means. They're explaining that we know what the halacha is, they have a tradition, or it's decided elsewhere, and they're interpreting the Mishnah in line with the halacha, but not historically. So, I mean, some people would say, well, isn't that a form of censorship? You're interpreting the Gemara in line to agree with the halacha, not with what it really means.
Okay.
I wouldn't use the word censorship about it, but if we understand that not everything that's being portrayed necessarily reflects the historical truth. So, I mean, if the rabbis decide not to mention a certain event because it thinks it reflects poorly on someone, that would be. By the way, this raises a question.
Yeah.
What I'm going to say here, people will sometimes they'll throw rocks at me if I was in person because it goes against some might even think it borders on heresy, but I think it's true. And I know it goes against the whole idea today of daf yomi and everything, but you have some crazy stories in the Gemara. You have a story, for instance, of one of the, I think it's the Amoraim, when he's riding on a donkey and he sees this man and he says, how ugly you are. And the man says, well, God made me.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, this point was made to me by, I heard this from a rabbi years ago and it stuck with me and I've expanded this. But you have to ask yourself, how is this in the Gemara? Anyone who reads this, what do you make of this? The holy rabbi is saying this. And I think you can make the claim that the Talmud, the reason this is a problem is because everyone, all the masses, we're all reading it. We're all doing daf yomi and things. But the masses never learned Gemara. Even in Europe, they didn't learn Gemara. This was for the elites. If you understand the Talmud as a book written by rabbis for other rabbis, then you can explain some of these unusual passages because the rabbis are talking among themselves. And they could put in a story criticizing the rabbi because, again, they're among themselves. The problem is only when people like us read it and we look at it and we're shocked at how could this be and everything. So in a sense, you could say the Gemara never really it wasn't intended for people like us, so you didn't have to cut out a lot of these things. The few matters that maybe were cut out, with women's issues, etc., when they didn't want to allow women to do it, so they took it out. But precisely perhaps because, and that explains censorship, I think, that I speak about. If the book was first published, why wasn't it censored the first time or the second time? But today, by the author, or by the early printers who after him, today, all sorts of people are reading these books. And the censors don't think that the masses should have access to it. What do you mean the masses? Only Torah scholars can read these books, but it's not true. Because today everyone goes to yeshiva, everyone can learn. It used to be that this tshuva maybe was read by just a few people, Talmudic scholars. Today lots of people could read it. So because of the democratization of Torah study, that has created all sorts of problems because people can see different views. That it's one thing when the Gedolim knew about these views, they could say, well, we don't accept it. But now the masses are being led into these views. That is really what's led to all the censorship.
Mm-hmm. And also, Otsar Chachma and the internet makes it even more accessible to everybody.
Yes, of course. Otsar Chachma is careful. They have censored, they've removed books that have been on because they have a policy only Orthodox literature. Yeah. HebrewBooks.org had all sorts of Karaite stuff, which I downloaded before they deleted it when they found out. HebrewBooks.org still has stuff which Otsar Chachma wouldn't have. But yes, that's also the great democratization, and many of these things are on Google Books. You can find them. You can. It's very hard today with the easy access, especially with the internet, to cover up and hide aspects of the past. And I actually think that one of the reasons why in the Haredi world many of my works are read is because I deal with a lot of these issues, and I'm not inventing anything in the sense that I'm talking about great rabbis who said things in the past that aren't in line with maybe what contemporary mainstream views are. That I find that of interest, showing how traditions develop. And I've been told by many in the Haredi world that what attracted them to the things I wrote is that in their world, they've never been exposed to this. It's Shivim Panim LaTorah when it comes to halacha. Then you can study the most radical views, and we say we don't accept it. But when it comes to hashkafa, there's no such concept as Shivim Panim. Now, all of a sudden, it's only the one directional. So that turns a lot of people off. And I happen to be interested in writing about the 69 other paths of Torah, even in hashkafa. So, that's how it tied into my book on censorship, because dafka, the passages that are sort of the outliers, they're the ones being censored.
Yeah. I remember I was scandalized 9 years ago when I met a Rav who said that we need to censor the Rashbam's Perush on the Torah. And as you know, they shortly after that, they actually put out a Perush of the Rashbam, and they censored it. There was
continues Art Scrolls, Migros Gedolos has it censored, exactly. It's terrible. It actually falls under the Chayrim of Rabbeinu Tam, who says that if you have a question, you can't make the correction in the Talmud itself. You have to only do it in the margins. If they have a problem with the Rashbam, of course, they'll tell you it's not the Rashbam, because the Rashbam couldn't have said it. But now, by the way, we know, we always knew it was true, but now we actually have the manuscripts of the Perush that continue on and explain his position. It's funny that Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky goes into great detail discussing this Rashbam, and he was like a spiritual advisor to Art Scroll. But when it came to, my friend of mine told me that today in the Haredi world, you can't publish the Rashbam, and therefore they have to leave it out. It's sad. It's unfortunate.
Well, I would say, I jokingly, perhaps Rabbeinu Tam was trying to defend the Rashbam. That's his older brother. So Rabbeinu Tam just said that because he was biased.
The issue is simply that the Rashbam explains by Yervei Voker at the beginning of Breshis, al pi pshat, that it means that the day starts in the morning, not the evening. But that has nothing to do with halacha. He even explains it in the new passages we have. And if you're going to be trouble with that Rashbam, the Rashbam says al pi pshat, we don't wear tefillin.
Yeah.
That it's only. I mean, he has also the fact is we're not guided by the pshat. We're guided by the Masorah Torah Shabbal Peh. That's the Rashbam's commentary. Throughout the commentary, he explains al pi pshat. So the idea that this is now it's true. The Ibn Ezra was very upset with this passage, but he didn't say it's a forgery. And he didn't say just said I reject it. But the Ibn Ezra had a different approach. He didn't believe in interpretations that went against the halacha. The Rashbam did. So I think it's also Amaratzis. There's a Rosh Kollel in Muncie. He came out with an open statement when Art Scroll published the censored version, and he said that it's making a mockery. I mean, it's because if you understand all the Achronim who dealt with this Rashbam, it's not a problem.
Yeah,
but so even from their standpoint, it's not a problem. I'm not talking about like Yehuda Chassid, who talks about passages later. I mean, this is something that so many of the great commentators have dealt with. This Rashbam, it's not a radical thing. It's not crazy. It's not like Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, where I understand this is coming out of left field. This is not the Rashbam here.
The gentleman I mentioned was actually scandalized by the Rashbam proposing in last week's Parsha that the Akedah was sort of retribution for Abraham cutting a covenant with the Philistines. And I don't understand why that would be so scandalous, but to say something that Avraham Avinu perhaps was deserving of divine rebuke is already too much to say. And we have to keep a perfect, pristine view of the Avos. And to even say that they might have done something wrong is already beyond the pale.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Ramban famously in Lech Lecha offers in two places, as I recall, he identifies sins of Avraham and Sara, which is it's always problematic because what's the source for this? It seems to be independent. He doesn't cite a source. But the Rishonim could do things that the Achronim can't do.
Hold on a second. I think we're losing something. I've lost Dr. Shapiro. Are you still there?
I'm here. You hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
I've lost your audio. Oh, fine. I think maybe that's the sign that we're out of time. I'd love to invite you on some other time, God willing, in the future. We thank you very much for your wonderful insights and your expertise, and hopefully we'll be able to cover more one day. Don't forget, everybody, like, share, and subscribe. Send your comments. Haggadah Pesach is still for sale, though it's selling out very fast, thank God. Dr. Shapiro has Igrot Malchei Rabbanan still available. We'll give you the link to that. I think it's worthwhile. It should be in every base medrash, God willing, soon. And check out his books on Google Books and all the other search engines. They're all available there. And we thank him for joining us this evening and this afternoon.
Thank you for having me. I hope my final comments, I don't know if they were lost, but or not, but it was a pleasure to be on with you, and wish you hatzlacha and success in all that you do.
Thank you very much, and be well, everybody. See you next week. Okay, there you go.